First program. The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic:
Material support for refugees in Passion for Truth award-winning program.
Welcome to another edition of Passion for Truth. The U.S. Patriots Act bars from asylum anyone who has engaged in terrorist activity or anyone who affords material support to the one who may have plans to commit a terrorist activity. Is that the legitimate basis for serving the cause of national security? How do we apply such laws in third world countries that operate oppressive policies? Well, with our panelists next, Dr. Gregory Staunton, President, Genocide Watch, also professor at the University of Mary Washington, Anne Buwalda, Director, Jubilee Campaign and Honor Just Law International. She recently testified before Congress on material support regarding refugees, and Dr. Joseph Annunziata with expertise on international affairs. As a former professor, Dr. Annunziata was an advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense on international issues. He was also a senior staff member at the White House. And Tim Ferriss, a news commentator and a legal analyst. Welcome you all. Starting with you, and should we make exceptions?
We need to redefine in the Patriots Act how material support is defined. The problem and the issue is that there are currently, the definition is so broad and such a broad sweep that it's created a situation where refugees and those who are fleeing persecution are caught by the definition as perpetrators of persecution, where the victims of persecution have become defined in the same lump as the persecutors. That makes no sense. Our law must be changed, since the waivers that have been put into the law as safeguards have not taken place. And it's gutting our refugee program. It's denying asylum cases. Another asylum case, Chin minority from the Burma, was denied asylum. A young lady denied asylum for giving material support, quote unquote, to one of the defense organizations that defends villagers from being wholesale slaughtered by the military junta that operates Burma. That kind of definition that is so broad sweeping needs to be changed.
Greg, the U.S. refugee program is under paralysis?
Well, yes, for a lot of reasons. First of all, there are a lot of people applying. But this particular act, the Patriots Act, is, in my opinion as a lawyer, void for vagueness on this issue. Right. Because it doesn't define terrorism. It actually just says, and I'm quoting from the Patriots Act, a terrorist activity means any activity which is unlawful under the laws of the place where it is committed. Now, what if you've got a regime like Burma or the former Soviet Union, you know, that bans China, that bans all unpermitted demonstrations or any publications that they don't like and so forth? Well, under this act, that person could be considered a terrorist because they've done something unlawful under the, and you see the problem with that is, I don't think that the act itself is irremedial. In other words, I think you could amend this act so that it could be so it could work. But as long as it is so broad that it doesn't define terrorism and that it doesn't make any distinctions, as Anne was saying, between people who, for example, are victims of terrorists. I mean, there's a case of a Congolese woman, for example, who was raped, who was made into a sex slave by a militia group in the Congo, and whose application for asylum was turned down because they said she had aided and abetted this militia group, which had been designated as a terrorist organization. It's incredible.
Yeah,
I wonder if you did an unlawful thing like going through a red light and got a speeding ticket, is that a terrorist activity under this definition?
So
it seems like it is open-ended. It seems like it is open-ended, and I think deliberately vague and open, because it gives the government the flexibility to make the decisions as to whether or not this person shall be granted a waiver or not. And that's why they go the waiver route rather than exception, because you've got the arbitrariness that it's built into the act. So you've got all these people in Guantanamo Bay, and you know, one could make the point, well, are they terrorists or not? Well, we'll decide if they're terrorists or not.
It also allows foreign governments to define terrorism for the purpose of U.S. law.
Right.
For what that's worth.
Right. Something wrong with that.
It
Something wrong
makes
with that.
a group like the Falun Gong, which is a meditation society, a terrorist group because they're illegal in China. You cannot be a part of that group. It's against the law, which is why ridiculously high percentages of people who apply from utterly repressive countries are denied their status and sent back. I think in China, for example, I think it's like somewhere in the 90th percentile.
Another problem that I have with this as an international lawyer is that because it doesn't define terrorism, it ignores the developing law in international law that does define terrorism. Terrorism is not, you know, some impossible to define term. International law is moving very clearly in the direction of defining terrorism as violent action against civilians. That's basically the definition that's developing. In other words, it's not when you try to attack a foreign governmental military or something like that. That's not considered terrorism. It may be something that the other government doesn't like at all. But when you go in as a suicide bomber with the intent to, in fact, kill civilians, now that's terrorism. And I think everybody knows that. So, you know, I think the Patriot Act ought to simply write that into its terms.
And Joe, even in democratic countries like Russia, India, the police brutalize the people mercilessly. If they manage to apply for asylum, let's say in the United States, will they be labeled as terrorists and denied asylum?
Well, you don't mean the police, you mean the people.
People, victims of the
in
police.
response to that brutality,
Yes.
have to defend themselves.
Right.
And they may engage in violent retaliation, or they may have to protect the people who are being attacked by the government and the police. So they are providing material support. So it's a crazy definition. What it means is that you have to be docile and allow an ethnic minority in a country to be pursued and persecuted, and they cannot make one attempt to respond. Otherwise, they're going to be legitimately accused of terrorism, not only by the country they're coming from, but even in the U.S. under this.
Right now, just in the last year or so in India, there have been 2 or 3 cases where a Sikh organization has had a march. So far what they've done is they've marched, they've arrived, they've made some speeches, they hoisted a flag, they were arrested. Are they terrorists?
So how do we identify those who have been victims of state-sponsored terrorism?
Well, I think the definition must be clarified, and I think the problem is with the third tier of the definition that is as broad as we've been discussing here. What we need to do with that part of the definition is to more narrowly craft what is a terrorist and what and how that affects the national security interests of the United States. If in fact we're allowing people to come to have refugee protection in the United States, we do, and under international conventions on refugee law, we do have an opportunity to review and consider whether they would be a harm to American interests, because no country has to receive and give refugee protection. They may be required to give some kind of temporary protective status, but certainly not a refugee status to somebody who is violent and who has done and perpetrated violent acts. Now, what we can do, however, is determine whether the acts taken were such that